Welcome to A Scrap Life, a podcast solely focused on the hustlers, grinders, operators, and business owners who live and breathe the scrap metal industry every day. Here is your host, Brett Eckhart.
So I'm sitting here with Nick Macan, Algoma Steel. We're in between sessions. At least I think there's another session going on right now at the Fast Markets Scrap and Steel Conference. This is my first time ever at this conference. Have you attended this specific conference before, Nick?
I think this is, I've been to a couple of other fast market events, but I think this is actually the first time that I've been to the steel and scrap one. I'm still relatively new in the industry.
Oh, really?
I've only been with Algoma for just coming up on 2.5 years now.
Okay.
New to the industry, new to these type of events. Haven't actually been in Houston for about 14 years, I think. So
really?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been down here.
What brought you to the dark side? What brought you
good to be here
the
today.
Scrap and the steel side? How do you go? What were you doing before this?
Yeah, so I've spent my career basically as a procurement guy and a logistician in a series of capital-intensive spaces.
Okay.
I was in mining, specifically gold mining, for a number of years, sort of working globally on that.
Okay.
I then transitioned into the cement space, and I was working in cement, materials, aggregates, I was, pandemic, we kind of got bored sitting at home. I don't really sure what it was, but I felt like another change was coming, another change was needed.
Yeah.
The opportunity with Algoma came up to join the team and be part of this sort of green steel EAF transformation. Very much sort of happening in my backyard in Ontario, and there's not, these sort of big mega projects, they don't come along often in your career anywhere. They especially don't come along often sort of at home, right?
Yeah, in your backyard.
And so to be able to do that close to home, and I still travel, I still live in Toronto, and I work 800 kilometers north in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Yeah.
So a little bit of lifestyle in terms of a bit of an easier travel schedule, but also just a chance to be part of this big, transformational project for the company and for the industry in Canada at the end of the day.
So before we get into the project, procurement on your guys' end, when you're talking about from the steel mill's perspective,
yeah,
I mean, that's your guys' ability to provide the inputs, scrap, recycled material, whatever you want, whatever the term of is going to be moving forward. But it's your ability to find the material to supply your new furnace that Algoma just is installed, right, with enough material to feed it on an efficient basis. I mean, is that
so today,
what's your big task?
Today, my task is keeping the blast furnace running, right?
Okay.
That's the task today, right? Go out and secure enough iron ore, enough coking coal in the market, enough limestone, get it there. To be able to run the blast furnace right now.
Yeah.
I also look after all the services. The CapEx for the project is part of my team as well, down to the nuts and the bolts and the MRO spares to keep the mills running. Right.
Yes.
Going forwards, that is gonna transition significantly, and it will eventually become a 100% scrap based operation with a portion of virgin metallics, and whether that's pig iron or whether that's HBI, DRI, we're a few years away from that. But I think that piece of the role, not only are we building this big construction project right now, we're also fundamentally reorientating the inbound supply chain network.
Yeah.
Because what you look at, what we have today is we have a couple of iron ore suppliers, right, and that's basically all vessel-based, marine-based material that's moving in 10,000 ton lots.
Which is how many tons a month is that currently, roughly speaking?
So because of where we are on the lakes, we have essentially a 9-month shipping season.
Okay.
So we're bringing in, in like total number of total amount of product. would be upwards of 5 or 6 million tons of all raw materials, but most of it coming in by vessel, right?
Yeah.
And most of it coming in from a couple of mine locations or a couple of port locations in terms of coal. Whereas when we look at shifting to the scrap world, it's going to be a much more distributed supply network,
Much more diverse.
Yeah,
supplier network,
and a more varied transportation approach as well.
Okay.
Now we'll be about 70% rail based,
Okay.
because the EAF is designed to be rail fed.
Yep.
But we'll have significant volumes of scrap coming in by water, and fairly significant volumes coming in by truck when compared to today. And even though will be relatively local, sort of 300. I'll stay in metric because that's how my mind works, right?
Yeah,
but we'll sort of 300-400 kilometer type radius for the truck traffic.
I mean, how many tons are you anticipating having to buy from the market to feed this new mill that you guys are putting in?
Yeah, so it's a ramp up, right? In terms of how we look at it, and so.
But at full capacity, when you guys really feel like you're at capacity,
full capacity, which is all our power. We have all our power, and sort of nameplate of the EAF. We're looking at the opportunity to produce 3 million tons a year, finished, right? Now to do that in terms of how much scrap, slightly depends. It does depend on what you decide in terms of metallurgy of your finished products, right? And how much virgin content you need in that finished product, particularly to get your copper to where it needs to be, right?
For sure.
So, it also depends on, do we end up with a HBI mix or a pig iron mix on that, in that final blend. But it could be, let's say it could be as much as 3 million tons a year of scrap.
So when you pop the gates,
at that final number, right?
Okay, so when you pop the gates in the beginning of your ramp up period, it's probably going to be and I assume so I'll back up a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So what is the anticipated timeline for you guys to start receiving recycled materials, scrap metal, HMS 1 and 2?
Yeah. So today we run a traditional basic oxygen furnace. We're anywhere between 15 to 20% scrap.
Okay.
On that, right?
Okay.
So I'd say we have a strong supply base of existing scrap
definitely a decent
vendors.
foundation.
And we've been in the market for a number of years, anywhere between 10 and 20,000 a month.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Of that sort of number. Right now the plan is to complete construction at the end of this year.
Oh wow.
And then ramp up begins, and we are essentially with that end of 24, that 25 ramp up, we're still going to stay around that 2.4 million tons a year, right? Finished steel.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be kind of a cutover, right? So the EAFs will do more. We'll still be running the blast furnace. We'll be using hot metal from the blast furnace. The BOFs, basic oxygen furnaces, will ramp down. We'll then switch to EAF production with a mix of scrap and hot metal, and then eventually, sometime between 25 and 30, we'll then have the opportunity to be, 100% EAF and 100% cold charge at that 3 million ton number.
So what was just out of curiosity, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine.
Yeah.
But what was the kind of the big shift it's not a small investment. B, that's a big move to say, okay, we're going to go from BOF to now we're going to go to EAF. And what was the mindset? What was the thought process? I'm sure that it happens on many fronts, on many levels, but is it just to be I'm not even gonna. I'm just gonna let you answer. Like, what is that? What was it?
So I think, like many of these big strategic decisions, right? They are the function of internal factors, external factors, things you can control, things you can't control.
Yes.
Ultimately, I guess if you look at it from a big picture perspective, we're approaching the end of life for the blast furnace.
Okay.
Right, so we are coming up to a blast furnace reline, blast furnace rebuild, which is not an insignificant capital investment for any steel mill.
For the layman's terms,
Yeah.
for the guys out there that don't understand.
Yeah.
What is just a range? What does it cost? You say it's not a small investment.
Yeah. So
what's not a small investment?
So I mean, it's interesting, right? Because we ran these numbers pre-COVID when they were probably actually significantly lower than they are today. But I think 200 to 300 million would be of the order, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, which is that's just like a structural reality of the operation. We've also got a price on carbon in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That price is increasing over time. So this year, 2024, the price is $65 a ton. It will increase to $150 a ton by 2030. So the price of carbon is definitely influencing investment decisions.
Absolutely.
in Canada, right?
Absolutely. And everywhere, I think, for that matter. I mean, it's not just Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, people are taking that into consideration on many levels in many countries. Canada definitely on the more aggressive side, but absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that was a significant factor, right, in our decision to make that investment in the EAF. I'd say in Canada also, industry is moving faster, right, than many other countries with these major decarbonization decisions.
Mm-hmm.
We're slightly lucky, I guess you could say, in Ontario that because we have a lot of nuclear capacity, we have a lot of nuclear baseload in the grid, that the average grid output, if you want to sort of, you can measure it in the peak, so you can kind of measure it as the average. About 90% of that energy would be considered sort of low emissions, right? So it would be a relatively low footprint. And we have, on a global standard, I would say we have competitive electricity pricing as well in Ontario. So we have
the location was good.
So we have a low carbon grid.
Yeah.
We have a reasonable price.
Yep.
And we have some policy factors that are
some increasing on the cost side.
Pressing, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are all. Those are all significant. We do have some support, but I think it's important to recognize that just this one project meets 100% of the provincial target for CO2 reduction.
Wow.
That's how switching to EAF is basically meeting the provincial 2030 target for Ontario.
And meeting it 5 years ahead of schedule, right? I mean, roughly speaking.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
we recognize there's a cut-over period.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not
4 years. Yeah, well, you're still ahead.
Hopefully ahead of schedule.
Yeah,
right?
and so which means you guys are you're thinking like not just financially what makes the most sense, but also trying to get ahead of a bunch of things that are coming down the line.
For sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are the similarities when you talk about when you're in procurement for a cement plant or mining operations? How does that, what are the crossovers, and then what are the differences that you see between the two? I mean, are they very similar in their function?
I mean, maybe I'll just answer that question first of all, just from an energy standpoint, because I think it is interesting, and one of the things that the cement space is grappling with is decarbonization as well, right?
Yes.
Some progress has been made, mostly by moving from coal to natural gas, which is a slightly better footprint.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest challenge that the cement industry has is the process emissions, right? The fact that you're creating the cement, you're driving the CO2 out of limestone.
Yeah.
Right. So you have a structural emissions challenge there in the cement industry, which is very difficult to.
It's a tough workaround.
Which
right?
is it's very difficult to mitigate that unless you sequester it, basically, right? That's sort of your option. So one of the things that we were sort of acutely aware of in the cement space was, from a procurement perspective, the sort of limited opportunity to reduce the footprint, the CO2 footprint of the energy supply, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could put in a more efficient kiln, maybe uses less natural gas. You can switch from coal to natural gas. Latterly, there was a lot of, not latterly so much, but there's a lot of work being done around alternative fuels. So can you burn solvents? Can you burn waste oil? Can you burn tires? Things that otherwise might end up in landfill, or just be incinerated with kind of no use for the energy. From a sort of more standard procurement perspective, I think the big difference, the big difference with the steel industry is, you make very big commitments in terms of those input costs around ore and coal.
Yeah.
Certainly one of the benefits, just in terms of the financial dynamics of an EAF, is that your input costs are going to more closely track with your steel price.
Yeah.
Right. So,
the
expectation is your steel price goes up. Well, scrap costs are going to go up as well.
Yeah.
Steel price goes down, scrap costs are going to go down. Right. So, you should be, if you look at the financial profile of the EAF producers that are out there today, it tends to be more stable earnings.
Do you guys, anticipate bringing in a large percentage of your material still by import? Do you feel like you can capture a good chunk of your procurement needs within Canada? How far do you think you're going to have to reach?
So it was certainly, that was a very critical critical piece of the puzzle for us in terms of sort of designing the future operating model. So one of the things we've done is we've put together a joint venture with M Metals.
Okay.
So we essentially have a joint venture entity with those guys. They are have a very significant scrap metal presence in Ontario, and a excellent presence also in the US, and have really brought a lot of knowledge to the table in terms of their ability to help us understand the market, help us understand what the supply base looks like. We are serviced in Sault Ste. Marie by both the CN coming from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and by the CP coming from Southern Ontario.
Okay.
So we have quite a good ability to bring in scrap sort of from both sides of the lakes, right?
Yeah.
To bring it up, through, Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, right, and across, and then on the other side, bring it in from Detroit into Ontario, and then up the other side of the lakes into Sault Ste. Marie, as well as bringing it in from Western Canada or a little further west in the US. So the market focus is certainly the Great Lakes in terms of primary supply, and we have good confidence that the material is there, the material is available. Certainly, as we look through our kind of phase one ramp up period. I think over time, the expectation is yes, we will have to draw in from further afield. But if you look at just the dynamics of the scrap market in Ontario today, there's a very significant tonnage that leaves the province. That leaves either to Quebec, and to Quebec mills actually leaves to Quebec and then exported, or product that leaves into the US. So there is a good balance of material, even just in Ontario, that's leaving the province today.
Well, it sounds like you guys have the ability to lean on your relationship with M too, and from a procurement side, from a scrap side, and be able to kind of attack it with a quote unquote partner that can kind of help,
absolutely.
has already developed that side of the business. And so will you guys be buying, I mean, will all purchasing on the scrap side come through Triple M, or will it be kind of a tag team type of approach?
So it will come, it will basically come through the JV.
Okay.
Is the way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
So we will buy some, product from Triple M directly
absolutely.
and from their yards, and then
But I mean, you're going to primarily use that JV.
We're going to our approach to the market is going to be as the joint venture.
Yes.
And so it's very clear that when people are selling, they're selling to they're selling to Algoma, right, in the form of the JV. They're not selling through just sort of all through Triple M. Right?
Yeah. So give me a little background on Algoma. I mean, for those that I mean, even in my neck of the woods, like my world, I'm not super familiar with Algoma. So give me a little bit of just kind of background on Algoma, what you guys are about, and usually I open up with that, but you just have such an interesting. There's not very many people that go out and are making that type of commitment on the EAF side, like right now, and in such a big way. So there's got to be a lot of history there.
Yeah, I mean, so it's definitely it's sort of an interesting story, I guess, of a little bit of looking at, I guess, the Canadian world. It also, at that point, sort of that bit of the Great Lakes and really the economic development of that bit of the Great Lakes in the late 19th century, turn of the 20th century, when railways were being built and ore bodies were being discovered.
Yeah.
And frankly, the location was kind of looked at in terms of the logistical benefits, but also being somewhat speculative. So there was an early hydroelectric station that was built on the US side in Sioux, Michigan. So there was power, right? And then it was really a question of like, well, where's the iron ore, right? There's iron ore on the Upper Peninsula. So there's iron ore close by. There was iron ore actually. I should take a step back from that. So actually, there was iron ore in Ontario, at a mine north of where we are today, which was rail, basically on rail served. Obviously, the development of the metals in Sudbury around sort of nickel and zinc in Sudbury was kind of another sort of adjacent support to the early foundation of the mill. But really, I think being on the water, being close to sources of material,
that helps definitely.
In a way that the mills in southern Ontario were not really, right.
Yeah.
So that was really the foundation of it.
Which was started in, like you said, the early 19s, right?
Yeah, so 120 years.
Yeah.
120 years of history. And it's, I think one of the really interesting things about, sort of the Algoma story is the relationship with the town, the relationship with the surroundings. Everyone knows somebody who works there or had a family member who worked there. We've got 4th and 5th generation employees.
That's awesome.
And I think one of the nice things about, the investment in the EAF is the ability to continue that legacy.
Yeah,
and to
you might get
continue
the
it
6th and 7th.
Right. Right. So that's that's the.
So is it family owned? Is it a publicly traded?
We're publicly traded. Today we're publicly traded. Listed primary listing is on the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long has it been a publicly listed company?
So we relisted came back onto the markets in 21.
Okay.
Previous to that, we were privately held by SS Steel, the Indian multinational steel company. They bought the company back in the mid 2000s. This is probably going to need some editing because
that's fine. No, you're
got
good.
My dates maybe wrong.
Yeah.
But the company had been, public prior to that. I mean, there's been a few. There's been a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of like a lot of these mills, I guess.
I think the interesting thing going from, say, the scrap recycled materials industry is such a relationship-driven industry, right? I mean, it's as much as all of us would love to say we two suppliers could supply everything we need, right? It's such a it's a collective of rail cars and trucks and and this and that and this supplier, and so I think that from my perspective, I feel like that's like you'll enjoy that part of it. I mean, how much of that you're involved in or not, I don't know, but I mean, probably the pricing and understanding the input side of it is probably more. But I feel like there's so much of that this industry is like, it's kind of in our blood is developing those relationships. So, I mean, I think you guys are doing the right thing by showing up at these conferences and saying, hey, like if there's,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the partnership with Triple M has really brought to the table. Their knowledge of the industry, their relationships with peers who are big, but also with smaller guys in smaller markets, to be able to go and say, we'd like you to be part of this, and this is how we structure it. Whereas it'd be very, very difficult for us to do that on our own.
Yeah,
right?
no, I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And I think that's even like you guys recognize the relationship component right out the gate. Like, we are going to need someone with those relationship deep ties in the industry for this to be a success. And I think that speaks to you guys thinking ahead. It speaks to Triple M and their capacity and their abilities. I mean, so I feel like it only makes sense to me. So I'll end this with one last question. Sure. But I mean, what have you found the most interesting, exciting? You could put that's from transferring from say mining and cement to now steel and scrap. I mean, is there anything that stands out that's
and there's a couple of things. I mean, I've always been a planes, trains, and automobiles guy, right?
Yeah.
So to me, like the variety, right, in terms of the materials movement side, I just find it fascinating. I find it endlessly interesting, right? Meeting with the shippers, meeting with the rail guys, figuring out how we're going to get product from A to B, what's the best way to do it, how fastest, cheapest, most efficient, right?
Yeah.
Like that side of it, and it's all it's a constantly sort of changing landscape, right? Of where can we get material at a good price, and how can we move it at a sensible cost, right?
Yeah.
And then I mean, the other piece, which I just think is I think is sort of at least to me enjoyable, is just the production is watching the process, right? Like, watching the blast furnace getting tapped, watching that liquid iron coming out, watching the pour from the steel, the steel ladle happening, seeing the hot steel go through the mill. I think it's, to me, I think is so interesting about that is that as much technology as there is in model steel making, you could still take someone from 100 years ago, and they'd be overwhelmed by the scale.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they have a really good understanding of still what's
and there's
what's
still
going on, right?
a lot. One thing I will add on to that is there's still a lot of art to the science, like on the steel making side. Like you said, fundamentally they would understand the process, because there is still an art form to making that blend, making that cake, and having it come out. Right. So, I mean, as a planes, trains, and automobiles guy myself, like I love just the grittiness of it and what it takes to actually get stuff from A to B, but also not just A to B, but to change its form and make new steel. I mean, it's an awesome process. So, thank you for taking the time, and I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference, and we'll see you around here.
Really great to meet you, Brett. And
absolutely.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.